Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Conversations 101. Today, I'll be interviewing the self-taught photographer and visionary. Before I continue, let's take a look at this clip. Sitting next to me today, I have Alex Belisle. What got you interested in photography, Alex, since you're self-taught?
I taught for 36 years in New York City, Board of Education, high school English. And when I retired, my wife wasn't that happy having me at home. So she said, why don't you get a job, or why don't you get a hobby? So I said, photography has always been something I wanted to do. And I saw an ad for freelance photographer needed in a local community paper. I said, well, I have nothing to lose. I don't need to do photography to pay the rent. It would be a hobby, and if I could get the job, it would be interesting. So I contacted them, sent them some photos. The funny thing was that the photos I sent were all landscape photos. So the editor emailed me back and said, well, do you have any photos of people? I didn't think. Newspapers is all about people usually. So lucky for me, about 2 weeks prior to this, I was at a concert and I got some really tight headshots of musicians playing in a dark setting, so it was a black background, very artistic looking. I sent these to him and they were saying, great, we'll send you the paperwork and we'll explain what you have to do to be a freelance photographer for our paper.
What are the advantages and disadvantages of being a self-taught photographer?
If you learn something on the job, you usually really learn it. You say to yourself, I'm not making this mistake again, I might lose my job. And when you learn certain things in school, they may not be what's really happening in the industry. What people do in the real world sometimes doesn't always match up with what they're teaching you in the academic world. So I learned very quickly by my mistakes. And that's something a lot of people talk about. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's the only way you're going to learn. And my editor, lucky for me, was trained in photography. He went to school for that. Plus he had a vast experience doing newspaper photography for a large New York City newspaper where he traveled all over the world. So by having him as my editor, he was also my mentor. He was able to tell me where I was going wrong and don't do that again. And when he said don't do that again, I did not do that again. Plus, we live in a time now where the internet is a very, very helpful resource. Maybe we didn't have it 20, 30 years ago, but now, if you can't figure out something, you could always go on the internet, go to YouTube. There's millions of videos, and you can just ask questions. And that's the easiest way to teach yourself. So between being out there on location, trying to figure out how many could get this shot, if I had trouble, that night I would just do my homework.
So I see that you're more of a hands-on guy than a theory guy. So tell me, what was your first paying job like with photography?
Before we even get to the paying job, maybe we should talk about why photography, when you're a photojournalist working for a newspaper, is so advantageous. We make a lot of contacts. Social networking is big nowadays. And I was able, because I was in New York City, obviously, I was able to connect with lots of different people. Politicians, celebrities, athletes, and other veteran photographers from whom I learned a lot. So then what happened was, one of the people I was shooting for the paper for an article owned a design company. They picked up a job from a client to do like a real estate shoot and do the graphics and design. So we got along very well. They knew me, I knew them. They said they had sort of connected me with those people, and I ended up doing a real estate shoot as a first gig. And again, I learned some new things because doing real estate lighting is very critical. So I was able to use apps that you can get on your iPhone or on your desktop that tells you exactly where the sun and the moon will be on any day at any time, so you knew if you were going to have light or shadow. And then the other thing I had to figure out, and this was, I guess, common sense from just shooting in New York City, because there's always traffic, there's always people. When could I get that shot where there wouldn't be hardly any cars on the street at that time to interfere with my shot of the building? It was also exterior and interior work. And so that was my first paying job outside of working for the newspaper.
So tell me more about your first paying job. Did you deliver, or were you a bit scared since it was your first time?
Scared because the person in charge, it was a doctor's office, and his wife was in charge. Before I even got it started, I was talking with some of the people working the desk and the nurses, and they all told me the same thing: watch out. And when you hear somebody say, watch out, you want to know why. She was tough. She was very meticulous. I want this, I want that, and sometimes when you do a job like photography, you could be the best photographer in the world, but if the client is real picky about things, then you have other concerns. Can I work with this personality, not just do the job? So it was doing the job well, yet working with this personality who was a real tough person to work with.
As a photographer, usually you have critics, usually criticize on your work and stuff.
I think we're the hardest critics.
That's true, actually. And who happens to be your biggest critic?
My family.
Why is that?
It's like when you're in the forest and you don't see the trees. Yeah. Sometimes the people closest to you, it's like, whatever. Yeah. They don't care. Just whatever. And so I have to deal with that.
So at what moment, Alex, did you know that you had an idea of what was going on behind the camera? At what moment did you know that you knew your job exactly as a photographer?
Both editors, my immediate editor, my assignment editor, and the chief editor sent out an email one day talking about the photographers on staff, and they had me right at the top saying, Alex Belisle is putting out some really, really good stuff, and you should check it out. And that was their way of networking with the whole photographer staff, because sometimes I never saw the other photographers except occasionally, let's say if we went out to eat. And so seeing my name up there and having both editors saying these positive things, I was like, well, if I'm good enough for them, I must be okay.
So I'd like to know more about your Nike experience. How did that come about?
One of the big things in New York City for photographers to get an official New York City press pass issued by NYPD at One Police Plaza down near City Hall in Lower Manhattan. Having a press pass for me was like getting my diploma from an academic photography school. And so when I had that press pass, I was using it for venues that had nothing to do with the paper, but I personally wanted to get in closer, because having that press pass around your neck and a big professional camera and looking as old as I am, like I've been doing it forever, I was at an outdoor basketball tournament in New York City, and I was taking photos basically for myself. But a young man walked out of the stands, and he said to me, my battery ran out on my camera. We're using Nikons. So I said, yeah, but my Nikon and your Nikon are different models, meaning the batteries are different models too. So we got into an interesting talk about photography. He was really into photography. About 5, 10 minutes into the conversation, I gave him my business card, the paper I was working with. So I said to him, "What do you do for a living?" He says, "Well, I'm the branding director for Nike Basketball Eastern United States." And of course, in my head, I'm like, right. And he was. I then sent him a Facebook link of about 40 pictures I took that day at the site. And within 15 minutes, he responded. And the response was like, "Wow, these are really great photos." So I said, "Thank you. You could always send me some work." And I tell young photographers too, be bold, be aggressive, ask for work. All they can say is no. They're not going to hurt you, but you have to be aggressive. And a week after, I got an email that said, blank, 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 Nike.com. Here's a work schedule for Nike Tournament of Champions in Brooklyn, New York. I was like, wow, that's pretty fast. And then they said, "You know, there are 3 thumbnails here. Can you give us the high-res versions of these 3 thumbnails?" To me, that was like, yes, I'm in.